Hello everyone, welcome back to Active channel. In today's video, we will talk about how to call the functions which are there on the employee table. In the last video, we talked about the functions that are there on the customer table, right? Now we will talk about the functions that are there on the employee table. This is the employee salary table which accepts the employee name and the employee department ID, and it runs some query and gives the employee salary. Okay. So there is another function is eligible for bonus. It does some logic and finds out whether employee is eligible for bonus or not and returns a boolean. So let's start building. Yeah, these are the employee related functions, right? So let's start building an employee entity first. Okay. So let's create an employee entity. Okay. So employee entity, right? It's having so many columns in the employee database. Let's create all the columns: employee ID, name, DPT ID, salary, status, performance. Okay, so let's create all of them at entity. Quickly we will create them. Private int employee ID at ID at generated value. We have to mention the strategy also, right? Generation type dot identity, and its column is employee underscore id. Okay, now the other column, private string. What is the other column? Name, right? Okay, its column is, what is the column name? Just a name, right? We don't have to mention when column name and the property name are same. We don't have to mention the column annotation. Okay, next one, so I'll mention this one as employee name. Okay, next, salary, right? DPT ID, department ID, right? So DPT ID, it will be an integer and its column name is at DPT underscore ID. Next one, salary and status. Salary will be the int salary and the column name is salary. Next one, status, right? Whether employee is active or not. Its status is boolean. Okay, there is another column, right? Performance, whether private string performance. I'll annotate this performance with that column performance. Okay, that's all. Let's create getter and setters. Now we are ready with the employee entity, right? Now let's go to repository and then create a repository, employee repository interface that extends from CRUD repository, and that takes an entity of type employee and its primary key type is integer, and I'm going to annotate this one with that repository Okay. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to have a couple of methods here, like in our customer repository, right? In customer repository, what we have done, we have written some methods and annotated those methods with it query and mentioned the function call there. Similarly, we will write something here. Okay. What I'm going to do, I'm going to call this get employee salary. Its return type is integer, right? So public integer is my return type. The Java method return type. Get employee salary is the method that is there in that I'm going to write in employee repository. It takes an integer argument, right? And also the department, integer department. So integer dpt id and the string employee name. Okay, that's all. So for this employee and in this department, what is the salary that I'm going to get it from here? Okay, so here I have to use again that query annotation and I have to give the SQL in the value property of that at query annotation. So what is that I have to mention? I have to mention the function name, right? So select get emp underscore salary. This is the function name, right? Yeah, it takes two arguments. One is employee name, other one is dpt id. Okay, so that's all about calling a function which has two arguments, and whatever arguments we pass to this function, they will be replaced by these placeholders while this function is getting implemented and this function is being called. Okay. Now let's create employee service. So what we need in the employee service, we need the employee repository, right? At AutoWire I have to mention, and this one I have to mention at service. Here I'm going to write public integer get employee salary. This is my method name, string emp name, and integer dpt id. This is the different arguments. I'm going to call employee repository dot get employee salary. What is that we mentioned? The same method. We have to call it from here. Okay. So here we have to return what we get from the repository. Again, let's finally create the controller. This will be a REST controller for employee controller, all employee related operations. I'm going to write a REST controller and let me mention some request mapping as well, slash employee. Okay, and then let's create a method here, public, and it returns an employee salary, right? Get employee salary. Here we have to take the data from the query param, right? String emp name, string dpt id. So at request param is what we have to specify. Okay. Similarly for this one as well, let's specify a request param. So here what we'll do, we will annotate this method with the request mapping slash salary. Okay. Here we have to call the employee service, right? So we need the employee service to be auto wired. Employee service dot get employee salary, and whatever we get from the input we will pass it here. Okay, we have to return that. There is a problem, we will see that. Get employee salary, the method string and integer in type employee service is not applicable. Yeah, I have to get this as integer. Now let's run the controller. Let's run the project. What we have to do, employee slash salary, employee slash salary slash question mark emp name I have to mention, right? What is that emp name I have to mention? Whatever is there in the employee table. So if you look at this, Steve is an employee that is there in both department 1 and 2. So I want the salary of the Steve whose department ID is 2. Okay, so let me mention employee name is equal to Steve and DPT ID is equal to 2. Okay, let's see whether so there is some problem right here. So let's look at the problem here. So it is saying no data type for node, tree method name, get employee salary. Okay, while it is trying to implement the method that we have written in the employee repository, there is some problem. Yeah, here if we look at this one, we are executing this as a SQL query, right? So we have to mention native query equal to true. Okay, now let's run this program. Yeah, it's running now. Now let's run the endpoint. So it is giving 2000 employee salary, right? Now let's also check for the same Steve in department ID 1. It is giving that particular Steve's salary. So this is how we have to pass different arguments. Okay. Say for example, if we mention integer here, okay, ID here, and string name here, what will happen? We will see it. Okay. So the ID will be okay. Let's modify here as well. Okay. uh, dptid and emp name in the service call. Okay, now it actually tries to substitute id in one, name in two. Okay, let's see what will happen. Okay, it is fine with the see this, it is giving some problem during the execution. We'll see that. See this incorrect integer value Steve for column param dpt id. So parent dptid is the second argument, right, in our procedure, but we are passing Steve as a Steve, which is string, as a second argument. That's why we need to be very careful while passing the parameters data. They should be in the same sequence the way we declared in the function. Okay. There is one more thing. Okay. Yeah, here we mentioned the parameter names as param, emp name, param, dpt id, right? But here we are giving the different names. So names doesn't match as long as the types and the sequence of the parameters we pass while calling that function is being maintained. Okay. Now let's look at the other one as well. The other function is there, right? What is that the function? The is employee eligible for bonus. Okay. Now let's call that function as well. So that returns a boolean whether employee is eligible for bonus or not. Right? Is eligible for bonus. So to this, what we have to pass? So we have to pass only the ID, right? So yeah, only the ID we have to pass. And while passing that ID, we have to annotate that method with that query, and we have to call that by specifying it in the uh, value attribute. Select is employee. What is that method name? Function name. Let me call it. Let me copy it. So whatever there that is passed to that particular method will be passed here. So native query equal to true. Okay, that's all. Okay, now let's go to employee service and see whether we are able to call the employee repository, get whether the employee is eligible for bonus or not. Is eligible for bonus. Here what we need the integer employee ID. We don't need these SOPs. Only we have to pass only the employee ID, and we have to call this particular method is eligible for bonus. Okay. We have to mention boolean return type. Now let's expose another endpoint for this. Mm, is eligible. Okay. Now I'm going to mention the ID in the path pair. So at the date path variable, variable integer ID. Okay, that ID I have to pass it here to employee service is eligible for bonus method. Okay, so it is going to return me the boolean type whether the employee is eligible for bonus or not. Okay, now let me execute this program. Yeah, it is starting. Yeah, there is no problem in the startup. So what is that endpoint? We have to call employee slash is eligible slash employee ID, right? So it is saying employee one is not eligible for bonus. So this is how we are calling a stored function. Okay. if you look at this, what it is saying, if the employee's performance is excellent or good, then it returns true. Employee is eligible for bonus. So one is not there. That's why it is returning the default value. Okay, let's say there is an employee 7 already, right? It is returning true because his performance is excellent. If you look at the one that is there with employee ID 9, it returns false. Okay, so this is how we can call the different kinds of functions that are there in the MySQL by using the Spring Data repositories. We have seen different examples, different variants of the functions which are having different kinds of input arguments, different kinds of output. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. We will meet in the next video how to call the stored procedures of MySQL from the Spring Data JPA repositories. Okay, thank you for watching. Please give it a like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.